May 14, 1909. The Sonoran Desert 12 miles west of Nogales. A single steel blade cuts through caliche hardpan at the rate of 47 feet per hour. The machine behind it is a Holt Manufacturing Model 60 Caterpillar tractor, serial number 1947. Its operator, a man named Samuel Hodges, age 32, has been pushing earth for the International Boundary Commission for 11 months. The temperature is 104 degrees. The blade weighs 680 pounds. It's the only piece of equipment capable of clearing the terrain fast enough to meet the commission's deadline. Hodges doesn't know it yet, but the blade he's operating will outlive the tractor by 73 years. It will change hands 6 times, cross the border 14 times, and become the only piece of American-made equipment to officially serve both governments in their efforts to define the same line from opposite directions. The story begins not with the blade, but with a problem. In 1848, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo ended the Mexican-American War and established a border running from the Gulf of Mexico to the Pacific Ocean. Roughly 2,000 miles. The treaty specified the line with geographic references, rivers, mountain ranges, established landmarks. But between the landmarks, nobody really knew where the border was. Ranchers crossed it without knowing. Towns straddled it. Cattle wandered back and forth freely. By 1882, both governments had enough. They formed the International Boundary Commission, a joint effort with American and Mexican teams working simultaneously from different directions. Their job, survey the entire border, mark it with monuments, make it real. But surveying was one thing, clearing was another. The desert between California and Texas presented terrain that laughed at manual labor. Ironwood trees with roots that went down 30 feet, mesquite thickets dense enough to stop a horse. Volcanic rock fields that could break a steel pickaxe on the first swing. The commission tried crews with shovels, teams with mules, even experimental steam equipment that broke down in the heat. Nothing moved earth fast enough. Then Holt Manufacturing in Stockton, California, perfected something new. The Caterpillar tread system. Instead of wheels that sank in sand, a continuous track that distributed weight across a larger surface. Their Model 60 could cross terrain that would swallow a wagon. In 1908, the International Boundary Commission ordered 3 of them. At $4,200 each, they were the most expensive pieces of equipment the Commission had ever purchased. But they came with something crucial: removable blade assemblies that could be swapped between tractors. The blades were manufactured by Marion Steam Shovel Company in Ohio. High-carbon steel, heat-treated and tempered. Each blade measured 8 feet wide, 4 feet tall, weighed between 600 and 700 pounds depending on the mounting hardware. They were designed for railroad grading work, but the Commission saw another use. If you could push railroad beds through mountains, you could clear a border through desert. Samuel Hodges was hired in June 1908. He'd been a railroad grader in Colorado before the Commission found him. His job: operate tractor 1847 along the Arizona-Sonora section, clearing a strip 30 feet wide, following the survey stakes the Commission teams had already placed. The blade he was assigned had been painted white with a black number stenciled on the left side, IBC3. International Boundary Commission, blade number 3. The work was brutal. Mesquite stumps would catch the blade and snap mounting bolts. Caliche would build up in front of the blade until the tractor's track started slipping. Every 8 hours, Hodges had to stop and chisel hardpan off the blade's cutting edge. The Holt tractor consumed 12 gallons of gasoline per hour and broke down constantly. But the blade kept going. If you want to see how one piece of equipment ended up serving 2 nations, please hit that like button. It helps us share more forgotten stories like this. Subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Hodges and his blade. By September 1909, Tractor 1847 had cleared 41 miles of border. Then, near a place called Quito Springs, the tractor's transmission failed catastrophically. The Commission's mechanic looked at the damage and estimated 6 weeks for parts to arrive from California. Hodges was reassigned to Tractor 1849, IBC3. His blade was unbolted and stored at the Commission's equipment depot in Nogales, Arizona. It sat there for 3 years. In 1912, revolution swept Mexico. The government collapsed. The border, previously a bureaucratic abstraction, became a military concern. American troops moved to prevent spillover. Mexican federal forces tried to prevent arms smuggling to rebels. Both sides suddenly needed something they'd never needed before: actual physical barriers at key crossing points. The International Boundary Commission still existed, but barely. Its funding had been cut. Most of its equipment had been sold or abandoned, but sitting in the Nogales Depot, IBC-3 remained, along with one functioning Holt tractor and a mechanic named Robert Farris, who'd stayed on because he had nowhere else to go. In March 1912, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers requisitioned the tractor and blade for emergency work. Their mission: construct an earthen berm along a 3-mile section of border near Douglas, Arizona, where Pancho Villa's forces had been crossing to raid American ranches. Farris drove the tractor south. In 6 days, he pushed up a berm 8 feet high and 12 feet wide. The Army strung barbed wire on top. It was crude, but it worked. 3 months later, Mexican federal forces asked to borrow the same equipment. The request went through diplomatic channels. The State Department approved it. The equipment technically belonged to the Joint International Boundary Commission, not exclusively to the U.S. In June 1912, Farris drove tractor and blade across the border to Agua Prieta, Sonora. Mexican engineers used it to build defensive earthworks against rebel attacks. For 11 days, blade IBC-3 pushed earth on Mexican soil, fortifying positions against Villa's forces. Then it came back and went to work again for the Americans. Then the Mexicans borrowed it again. Between 1912 and 1917, blade YBC-3 crossed the border 14 times. Each time, it was borrowed by whichever government needed it more urgently. The tractor changed. The original Holt finally died in 1914 and was replaced by a newer model. But the blade kept transferring. Its mounting system was universal enough to fit different tractors, and both governments knew it, trusted it, kept records of it. By 1917, the blade had been modified. Mexican engineers had welded additional bracing to the mounting brackets. American engineers had replaced the cutting edge with harder steel scavenged from railroad ties. It was no longer entirely the blade Marion Steam Shovel Company had manufactured. It was something else, a hybrid tool marked with repair work from both nations. World War I ended the sharing arrangement. The U.S. military took permanent possession of the tractor and blade in November 1917. Farris, by then 53 years old, was discharged. The equipment went to Fort Huachuca. IBC-3 was repainted olive drab, its identification number covered over. For the next 6 decades, it existed in military inventory records only as dozer blade, general purpose, surplus. But it kept working. Through the 1920s, it was used for road construction on military bases. In the 1930s, the Civilian Conservation Corps borrowed it for erosion control projects. During World War II, it graded airstrip approaches at desert training bases. Each time the blade was transferred, the paperwork followed, and buried in that paperwork, if you looked carefully, you could find references to its original designation, IBC-3. In 1954, the U.S. Border Patrol launched Operation Wetback, a mass deportation program that required rapid construction of vehicle barriers along sections of the border. They needed equipment. The Army loaned them older surplus machinery, including from Fort Huachuca's depot, one ancient dozer blade. A Border Patrol mechanic named Martin Crespo examined the blade and noticed something unusual. Under the olive drab paint, previous paint layers were visible where the steel had chipped. He started scraping. Underneath, white paint. And under that, stenciled in black, barely legible, IBC-3. Crespo was a history enthusiast. He researched the designation, found old International Boundary Commission records, traced the blade's lineage. In 1955, he wrote a letter to the Smithsonian Institution suggesting they acquire it. The Smithsonian declined. Insufficient historical significance, their reply stated. The blade went back into service. Throughout the 1960s and 70s, it was used intermittently for border barrier construction, always as a backup when newer equipment failed. By 1982, it had been in service for 73 years. The tractor it was mounted to by then was a 1970s-era Caterpillar D7, fourth generation of tractor, original blade. That's when it finally broke. Not the blade itself, but the mounting brackets, the ones Mexican engineers had welded in 1913. Metal fatigue. They cracked during operation near San Luis, Arizona. The blade was detached and transported to a Border Patrol maintenance facility in Yuma. The foreman there, reviewing the equipment disposal list, noticed the IBC designation. He'd heard stories, he made some calls. Eventually, he reached a curator at the Arizona Historical Society. The curator drove to Yuma, examined the blade, photographed the stenciling under ultraviolet light to bring out the faded paint, and verified its provenance. In 1984, the blade was transferred to the Arizona Historical Society Museum in Tucson. It's there now, mounted on a display stand restored to its 1909 appearance. White paint, black stenciling, IBC3. The placard next to it reads, International Boundary Commission Dozer Blade, 1909 to 1982. The only piece of equipment known to have been used by both the United States and Mexico in the construction of border barriers. Manufactured by Marion Steam Shovel Company, Ohio. Served 14 documented tours of duty on Mexican soil, 41 on American soil. But the placard doesn't mention Samuel Hodges, who operated it first, or Robert Farris, who drove it back and forth across the border 14 times and never considered the irony, or Martin Crespo, who saved it from a scrap heap because he thought history mattered. The blade weighs 680 pounds. It's 8 feet wide. It pushed earth for 73 years. It built barriers for two governments that disagreed about almost everything except that this particular line needed to be clear. And somehow, despite being a tool designed to divide, it ended up being the only piece of equipment both nations trusted enough to share. The border it helped build is still there. The walls have been replaced, rebuilt, reinforced dozens of times, but the line itself, the one surveyed by the International Boundary Commission and cleared by 3 Holt tractors and their swappable blades, hasn't moved. IBC3 sits in a climate-controlled museum now, under glass, behind velvet ropes. Its cutting edge, replaced in 1917, shows wear patterns from both desert caliche and Sonoran volcanic soil. Chemical analysis of residue in the blade's crevices shows trace elements consistent with earth from both sides of the border. Which side is which, the analysis cannot determine. If this story moved you, please like and subscribe. Your support helps us preserve these histories. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from.